Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Fortress Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Caleb, and with me, as per usual, is my good friend and other host, Michael.
Hey guys.
We're back with not so long a stretch between episodes, which is nice. It was still a couple months longer than what I think we were both hoping for, but at least it wasn't like 3 years like last time.
Holidays got into the way of recording.
Yeah, holidays, work, all that sort of good stuff. But we're back, and today we're going to be talking about just sort of our own pitches for if the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, were to ever have a full on reboot. If it were to start over from scratch, what our ideas for how to handle it would be.
Because honestly, with some of the newest news that had come out, and with actors losing contract, it's almost like they could very well reboot the entire MCU at this point.
Yeah, it's such a mess right now that I don't see how. Like, it's so weird that they're gonna just seemingly keep moving forward. I don't understand why you wouldn't wanna just. Well, I say that. It's possible they're waiting to see how the DC reboot works because if that flops, that might give them some pause on a reboot, but if that is successful, they might see that and decide to go on forward with that. Possibly.
Yeah. How would they go about doing the reboot? Because I can't immediately think of a event other than like maybe Secret Wars where they could do a complete reboot and restart the MCU. Because like DC has Flashpoint and I'm trying to think there's some another big event like Crisis on Infinite Earths or whatnot where they are easily able to reboot the franchise if they wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I I don't necessarily think that they need an in-story reason to reboot like that. I mean, they could, and that could be really cool, um, depending on how it's handled. But I think, just for me personally, what I would want is a complete fresh start. Nothing connecting it to the old MCU, nothing tying it down to that in any way. Just in the same way that they rebooted the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man into the Andrew Garfield. Like there wasn't an event that caused that to happen. It just here's a new series. For me personally, that's kind of what I would want, but I could see it working with using Secret Wars to do a reboot as well, depending on how that's executed.
I guess I could, like you said, get away with doing doing a separate series and calling it the reboot. I guess as long as we go in with the understanding that this is a different timeline or continuity, like what they did with Spider-Man, that
Yeah.
very well could potentially happen.
I think that's one of the biggest flaws that DC's had with their reboot right now is not being entirely clear on how much of it is a complete ground up reboot and how much of it is carrying over from the DCEU. Um, I'm overall really excited for that reboot, but I can't tell you how much of it is a fresh start because there are still rumors that like Gal Gadot could continue playing Wonder Woman or Margot Robbie could continue being Harley Quinn, and it's like, but so much of the rest of this looks like a complete fresh start. But those things might carry over. So it would definitely need to be handled better than that and just upfront being like, okay, this is a complete reboot, or upfront being like, this is coming out of Secret Wars. Secret Wars kind of restarted things, but it is a continuation of that to some extent. They just need to be clear about it.
Yeah.
Um, so that is kind of where my pitch when we get into this is coming from, is more from the uh, ground up reboot type of thing. So you want to kind of just talk a little bit about what your idea is? Because you mentioned it a little bit before we got started.
Yeah, so I mean, my kind of idea backs off the Secret Wars, or kind of even more in like the multiversal theory that they have going with the What If series. Because out of uh, some of their most recent shows or movies, the What If series has a lot more fan excitement from it. And I haven't seen the second season yet since it just came out a couple of weeks ago. But I heard that it was really well received, and so I would think they would back off that success and use like Captain Carter and those sets of characters, and re if they do reboot it, restart with those characters and potentially do like a new storyline. Go completely scratch. Probably pull a little bit from the comics, but I would be interesting to see if they go just utilize the character straight out, no comic backing or whatever.
Interesting. Okay. So are you suggesting like they pick not one of the universes that's in What If necessarily, but just kind of a lot of those characters and ideas into a universe that contains a lot of those things?
Yeah, or even just keep following their story set up in the What If series, because obviously, with the exception, I think Far From Home, none of the post Infinity Saga has been well received or well liked by fans. So that's what keeping up on that success, I think would uh, definitely help Marvel instead of potentially rebooting and like recasting everybody.
I think Guardians 3 was pretty successful among fans. I haven't heard too much negative reception to that. But I think outside of that and the Spider Man stuff, yeah, there's definitely been significantly more negative reception to things than positive. Have you gotten around to Guardians 3 yet?
I'm trying to think. I don't believe so. That's one I need to watch at some point.
Yeah, I still, because I mean, I've made no secret about it. I'm not a fan of No Way Home at all. I don't think that's a very good movie. So for me, Guardians 3 is absolutely the best thing they've done since Endgame. I liked Eternals more than most people. I liked the first season of Loki more than most people. I actually really did like Hawkeye
Oh yeah, I
as
forgot
well.
Loki. I forgot that was a good. That's a good series.
I still haven't seen the second season yet.
You still have some. Wow. It sucks because they really doubled down on Jonathan Majors, but then the last episode sets it up to where you don't need him as
Okay.
part of the TVA or whatnot. So like the only thing that's really keeping Majors in the MCU is like the Kang variants or whatnot. But it'd be interesting to see what they do with Kang the Conqueror storyline, since they sounded like last year kind of doubled down on his character after Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania or whatever. So But yeah, I definitely forgot about Loki. It's definitely really good, especially season 2. But yeah, I haven't watched any of the shows other than Loki. Well, actually, no, I take that back. I watched Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I enjoyed because I always love Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan together.
Yeah, they're always a lot of fun. I had issues with a lot of the writing in that show, but they carried it for sure.
Well, because that show got caught up with apparently had an alternate pandemic storyline
Mm-hmm.
that coincidentally it came out around the COVID era. So they thought it would have been a bad taste to include all that, so they basically had to rewrite the show while filming it.
Yeah, that sucks.
That was that show's downfall, unfortunately. But
That would have been interesting to see. I'd been kind of curious to see what that storyline would have been like, but I can also see the hesitation to doing that when they did it. I
because I
wonder.
think it was a bioweapon like pandemic, and so with all the conspiracy theories that the Chinese developed COVID as a biological weapon or whatnot, that would feed into it, you know?
Yeah, I can totally see not wanting to do that then. I'd wonder if, since by the time it comes out, there will have been so much time between then and COVID that they might try to use that for the um, Anthony Mackie Captain America movie, because it's the same writers doing that, and it's not coming out till like 2025, maybe even 2026. So there'll be enough time in between that I could see them maybe bringing that back.
They could, yeah. Because I don't remember. The issue is, I think the Flag Smasher group was a main part of that storyline.
Okay.
So I'd be curious to see if they do keep that. They do keep that storyline. How much they change to fit where they are within the continuity of the MCU.
That's true. So, what do you think is more likely at this point dealing with the whole Jonathan Majors thing? Do you think they scrap the Kang stuff entirely and just kind of try and find a way to very quickly get rid of him so they don't have to deal with that character anymore? Or do you think they just recast and have a new actor take over so they can continue on with the Kang stuff?
It's funny because Marvel has set the precedent of doing both. They've both recasted characters and also just written out characters.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal preference would be in like the Secret Wars or whatever the next big Avengers movie is you kill them off like first half of the movie and then you introduce like Doctor Doom as like the next big bad is the one I've heard being the potential big bad. You bring him in, or you do like Galactus or something. You know, switch gears to different big bad. Because I like Jonathan Majors. I hope they don't recast him,
They've
'cause
al-
especially with the Loki series. It's he shines as he remains and Victor Timely.
they've already fired him.
Yeah, did you hear about that? So they fired him, and then Good Morning America, I believe, did like a sympathy interview with them or whatever.
Really?
Yeah, and you know what's funny about that? Good Morning America is ABC. ABC's Disney.
That's weird.
So it's almost like doubled down on the firing of them, which is typical corporate Disney shenanigans.
Yeah, for sure. I'm I'm kind of back and forth on that whole thing because Doctor Doom is one of my favorite Marvel villains. I'm a big fan of that character. And especially since both the 80s and the 2015 versions of Secret Wars are big Doctor Doom stories, it'd be really weird to continue that movie with Kang as the villain instead of using him. But it would also, but I don't want him introduced in that movie or introduced in one movie beforehand and then suddenly he's the big bad of everything. Like, I think he's a character that needs to be built up to more before you get to that point. Um, and so I don't know exactly how you'd handle it because I definitely don't want it to be just like, oh, and by the way, suddenly there's this bigger threat and it's Doctor Doom and he's the one that the Avengers have to fight and take down, you know? But I
Well,
don't.
I mean, it could be one of those, like Doctor Doom kills Kang the Conqueror, but you have his roots set back to like Sokovia, and so that's why you got the deep-rooted hatred that kind of spans for multiple years. That kind of motivates him, and then like he, like Doctor Doom would kill Kang, take over whatever Kang would be using, trying to destroy the Avengers or whatnot, and become like this higher, I guess higher entity kind of thing, and forcing the Avengers to cooperate and try to defeat him.
Yeah, that's true. If they did that, he'd have to be like in the movie throughout, and that could be like the very end of the first movie, since they are doing it in two parts. That'd be like the end of the first movie, and then the second movie, he's the big villain throughout.
Yeah, because what are the working titles for the next movies?
It's
I can
either
never.
it's last I heard that they're ditching Kang Dynasty and they're both just Secret Wars Part 1 and 2. Um,
Is it Secret Wars letter? I thought.
because it was originally
Uh,
supposed to be Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, but after they got rid of Majors, the uh,
okay.
they're ditching Kang Dynasty, and it's just going to be Secret Wars Part 1 and 2, I think.
Okay, yeah, they're doing the back to back like they did with Infinity War and Endgame.
Yeah,
Okay.
which would be
So
in.
yeah, that would make sense if they wanted to introduce like Doctor Doom in the first one, and then have like the main battle or whatnot in the second one.
Yeah. It would be interesting if they do end up doing the Secret Wars Part 1 and 2, because that was originally what Infinity War was supposed to be. Infinity War and Endgame were Infinity War Part 1 and 2. It would,
Yeah, because when they announced Endgame, because I know there was a lot of hype around that title release, because apparently it wasn't a word spoken in Infinity War, but it was or something like that.
yeah, that whole thing was so stupid where they just straight up lied about what the title was, and then it ended up being Endgame. I don't think we knew what the title was until the first teaser for that one came out. I think they announced the title at the end of that trailer.
Yeah, because I just remember a bunch of hype around the name, because yeah, I think for the longest time it was uh part one and part two. So
Yeah.
all right, so we've heard my pitch. What's your pitch for rebooting the MCU?
My pitch is more like what I was talking about earlier, just kind of doing a straight up from scratch, kind of like what, well, I was going to say kind of like what James Gunn is doing with the DC side of things, but like I said, they're not being entirely clear on what that is. Have no connection to the pre existing MCU, just start from scratch, start from square one, I would start with a Fantastic Four movie. I think that if you're going to be doing a new MCU where you have access to Fantastic Four, X-Men, Spider-Man, all of that from the start, you start with Fantastic Four. I think that that's easily where you should start from that. I'm honestly kind of shocked that MCU hasn't gotten a Fantastic Four movie out quicker since they got the rights to all of that.
Well, they just gotten the rights, what, 2, 3 years back?
That was back in 2018 when the merger happened. And they announced it like 2019. Like it was very
Okay.
early on.
Well,
Um,
I mean, with the COVID and then I guess already having everything slated through basically 2023 at that point, would have been hard to push out a Fantastic Four movie at that point.
yeah, but at the same time, they have such a track record of getting movies out pretty quickly. Like Homecoming was announced in I think 20 like late 2015, and they got that out by mid 2017. Um, and they had to reorganize their schedule to do it. Granted, that was back at a time where there was a lot more of like a guaranteed quality to these movies that there isn't anymore. So I wouldn't trust like modern Marvel necessarily to like rush out a Fantastic Four movie. I'm just saying that with how important the Fantastic Four is to Marvel Comics and the Marvel Universe as a whole, that you wouldn't get that out sooner. Or at the
Yeah.
very least, there wouldn't be more like news about it. Like that's been announced for 4 years now in the works, and we still don't have any casting for that. Like no confirmed cast for that movie.
Well, I mean, because if you think about it, the Fantastic Four movies we have don't have the best don't have the best track record when it comes to box office appeal, other than say maybe the first one from the early 2000s. So I feel like it would be hard trying to set up the MCU off of Fantastic Four, because if it was to fail, you're already not off to a good start, especially under like you said, the quality of modern MCU compared to during the Infinity Saga, where they were really only putting out the movies.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I think that if I think that though if they get the right people behind it and they market it well, a Fantastic Four movie could be a great place to start. Um, there is, of course, just that history in the comics of the Fantastic Four being a very important team to the Marvel Universe. And I think they could, if they were to reboot and start there, advertise it on that as like these are like the central figures of the Marvel Universe that were kind of missing the last time around. We're starting with them this time. I think that could, if done right, be a big appeal that could bring people in to see those movies. A lot of that too is just like the fan and me being like, well, we're going what 4, 5 phases in this MCU with no Fantastic Four, regardless of whether there's legal rights causing that to happen or not. If you reboot, I think that's where they should start. Um, just because that is such a foundational and important part of um, the MCU. And at the same time, if you go back to 2008 when Iron Man came out, Iron Man was even less well known than the Fantastic Four is and less popular. And they had the right strategy for that movie in both advertising it and just the people behind it. And they just made a good movie with it. And that ended up being super successful. So I think even if the Fantastic Four doesn't have the best pre existing track record, if it's handled right, that could be a huge success for them.
Okay, so you're talking about track record. Who would you have direct the Fantastic Four film, and then who would you have star in it?
I am not good when it comes to the fan casting thing. That is not. Um, I don't know why, as far as like casting goes, I've always kind of thought, and this is like a weird kind of off the beaten path choice, but I've always thought that like Brandon Routh could be an interesting Reed Richards. Um, I don't know why. I've just always thought that if you're not gonna go with like the super obvious choice of like John Krasinski or someone like that who like everyone fan cast for that role, I think Brandon Routh would be an interesting choice. Um, I don't immediately have choices for any of the other characters on that team. As far as directing goes, I can't immediately think of his name, but the guy who directed the Incredibles movies. Because for years, everyone said that The Incredibles is just the best Fantastic Four movie. That guy. I can't think of his name, but that guy should direct it.
Interesting. I guess also for the longest time, The Incredibles was like the only superhero film we had, in a sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about uh? So talking about the reboot MCU, how far are you wanting to go with it? Because obviously, modern day MCU started back in 2008 and has covered 4 or 5 phases, like you said. How far is your MCU going, and how far out of the storyline do you plan?
Um. So the way that I was kind of thinking about it is because you'd want to do something different than the original MCU. You wouldn't want to just do like this is a lot of the same things that the old MCU did, just with kind of like a new coat of paint on it. You'd want to find certain ways to differentiate. So the first idea that I had was instead of doing like the sagas, like the Infinity Saga, the Multiverse Saga, that sort of thing, which is a huge storyline told out throughout the course of multiple phases, you'd have each phase be its own kind of overarching storyline that's told throughout the course of a mixture of completely standalone movies and movies that play into this bigger storyline. Um, so, like, the big, instead of doing like an Infinity Saga, you do a storyline for Phase One that kind of connects the movies together in some way, and then the next phase kind of builds upon that but has its own storyline. Like there's a connection to it, but they there's not something that's like, okay, we've been building up to this for 3 or 4 phases. Here's the big event movie type thing. You keep the phases a little bit more contained, but leave room to build off of them afterwards. Um, as far as how long it would go on, I would say I don't know. It's hard to be like, okay, we're gonna plan this out for like 10 years, and then after 10 years it ends. Um, That really just depends on how successful it would be, and um, how well received you could keep doing it. I don't immediately have like, okay, and at this point it ends type thing.
That's fair. So what storylines would you adopt or potentially try and plan out?
So for the first phase, I think it should be a little bit more like not disconnected, but here are the things that we're introducing. I think that it would be, again, I don't want it to just be the original MCU again. So, like, phase one would not be building towards an Avengers. You'd either have just an Avengers movie in there that's just part of the sequence and not necessarily being built to, or you hold that off till maybe the second phase and spend the first phase with some of these other things. Um, I think the first phase would be a little bit more vague in its storyline. Maybe do something like, um, okay, and now the world's adapting to having superheroes in it. I wouldn't do the thing that the original MCU did, where it's like, okay, Iron Man's here, and now we start getting superheroes, and now the world's introduced to superheroes. I'd have it be where superheroes have been around for a little bit, like maybe 4 or 5 years prior to the start of everything. Like, my Fantastic Four movie would start with them already having been around for a while. They're already an established team that are doing things in this universe, but we're still early enough where people are still getting used to that. And you use these movies to kind of show the different ways that people are adapting to that. Like, you do an X-Men movie, how is the world adapting to mutants are just popping up everywhere? And that's probably what I would do with an X-Men movie if I did one in the first phase. Is mutants have kind of been around for a while, but now they're really starting to show up, and they're showing up at a much faster rate than they used to. But the first phase would be the world is adjusting to superheroes and getting used to them. And you'd probably start sowing the seeds for maybe a Civil War type event down the line in maybe a third phase or something like that. You'd start sowing the seeds for that early on in here, and then slowly build up to that. Um, that would kind of be my idea for how you do that first phase. What was that?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Um, one idea that I did have was because, like I said, it would be early on in the superhero. Like, superheroes have only just within the past decade started really popping up. So maybe instead of like an Avengers thing, you'd do, because I've never been a huge fan of the Avengers are brought together by Shield. So I think maybe the big like team up movie for this first phase could be kind of like a Thunderbolts type thing, where Shield, in response to superheroes popping up, are using different villains or anti-heroes to form like their own team as like a response to superheroes popping up. And then in like the second phase, you get the Avengers forming on their own as like the true superhero team, um, in response to the Thunderbolts type thing. I didn't have a chance to like really put a plan on paper for what I was going to talk about, so I'm like thinking of these things as I'm saying it. But that is one idea that I've had before of, instead of building up to the Avengers, you build up to this almost like counterfeit superhero team in like the Thunderbolts, which are made up of villains and anti-heroes, and then later on you get the Avengers in response to that.
Okay, yeah, that would be an interesting, an interesting way of doing it, setting up the established superheroes. Because so would you have like flashbacks to their origins, or would you just, or are you on the side of origin stories are so overrated now that I'm just not even going to do one, or are you going to like flashback to like Fantastic Four, for instance, like their accident in space with the cosmic energy?
I think it depends on which character we're doing, because like with the Fantastic Four, you don't need a whole movie dedicated to that. You don't. I honestly don't even think that's interesting enough to show in scene. I think that Fantastic Four's origin is always better when it's just an excuse for them to have powers than an actual story to be told. So I'd just have it be a conversation early on in the movie where you explain that um, they were either going to another dimension or going into space, and this accident occurred and they got superpowers from it, and that's that. I don't think that you need a full-on story with that. For other characters um, like Daredevil, for example, I think that that's a character where an origin is more interesting, because you have um, his accident as a kid where he loses his vision and then gains his super senses and then spends years training with ninjas and stuff to become a vigilante and a superhero. I think that is a more interesting story. So I think with that, that would make more sense to tell in a movie if there were a Daredevil thing to start off, and then that's that's like the scenario where I would tell an origin story as opposed to um, just kind of explaining it real quickly.
Okay. Hmm.
So
It'd be interesting.
switching over to your pitch for a minute, do you have any like specific movies that you've got in mind for what they could do?
Uh, Not really, because obviously I'm doing more of a original idea from Marvel that there's no real kind of comic backing. I mean, I'd probably do like a Secret Wars type of storyline since you're dealing with like the multiverse and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But nah, mine's a little more open ended using new characters created from the series.
Okay.
Really, I couldn't really immediately think of any sort of storyline that could be adapted. I
Okay.
mean, you could like obviously modify some storylines, like obviously not you have your main Avengers group in the comics, but then due to being the multiverse, you could have this what if cast of characters, following the same storyline.
I
Which
gotcha.
I guess in that in itself would also be interesting to see. But as far as specific storyline that they would follow from the comics, nothing really would immediately pop into head.
Okay. Of course, with that, you could do some interesting stuff with, like, you know, like I think that some of the ideas that they did in What If in both the seasons, um, I'm not the biggest fan of how they executed a lot of that stuff, but I think some of the ideas are pretty interesting and could make for interesting movies if you expand on it and stuff. So like the Captain Carter episode could be an interesting movie. I'm trying to remember what some of the other concepts they did. Of course, Marvel Zombies could be an interesting movie. I thought that was one of the worst episodes of that show, but I think that that could be an interesting movie if done right. Um, but also like just taking different events from the MCU and doing like the what if question with it and making movies out of that could be interesting as well.
Yeah, because what they've done, specifically thinking of Captain Carter, they've done the first Avenger, they've done uh, a Winter Soldier storyline in season 2 that I saw. So last would be a Civil War episode in season 3, which would be interesting to see if they do it.
What did they do with Winter Soldier in season 2 with her?
I've only seen clips of it since I haven't actually seen the full season or the full episode, but it sounded like so obviously in season 1 in the Captain Carter First Avenger episode, they set up Steve to be the Hydra Stomper or whatever in his suit of armor.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently they make the Hydra Stomper the Winter Soldier. And so uh I can't remember if Steve's in the suit, but from the clips I've seen, it's the Hydra Stomper is basically the Winter Soldier.
Oh, okay.
And instead of Pierce being head of Shield or the congressional side of Shield, it's Bucky,
Oh, interesting.
which I thought was an interesting dynamic from clips I've seen.
Okay.
But yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because as far as I know, there isn't a Tony Stark in that universe. Of course, they could have probably introduced one in the Winter Soldier episode, but I haven't seen it yet to know. But curious to see if they do the Civil War storyline, since they're ripping. I say ripping, basically ripping the storylines of the Captain America movies through Captain Carter.
Okay.
So it'd be interesting to see if they stick with, having Steve as the Hydra Stomper / Winter Soldier kill Tony's parents, and then they fight it out or whatnot, and then brainwash or whatnot. It'd be interesting to see how much of the original Civil War storyline we got from the MCU and see if they keep that in the Captain Carter's universe.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Uh, yeah.
Okay. So when the MCU finally introduces X-Men, because that seems to be coming soon, at least at some point if they don't reboot. How what do you think is the most likely way they're going to handle that? Assuming we continue on with the MCU we've got right now and don't get some sort of reboot.
Continuing on with what they have now, I would say it would probably be people would be getting their mutant powers as an after effect from the blip. I think is how
Okay.
they would do it. Because all that, because the Eternals set it up to be like a mass amount of cosmic energy release. at the blip, utilizing the stones. So I got a feeling those that were blipped probably had their DNA affected,
Okay.
and that would probably how they would segue into it. That or they use Scarlet Witch's power uh, to make mutants. Because I believe that's how Monica Rambeau got her powers in WandaVision, was being blipped, but then also going through the hex. Uh, gave her powers.
Yeah. That'd be interesting if they did it that way. It would be weird if the way that you get to mutants is through something completely unnatural, because the idea with them has always been like this is just natural mutation um, taking effect in people, and it's like the next step in human evolution type thing. Um, and so it would be kind of strange to me if they get to that and it's, well, it was actually caused by something like Scarlet Witch created created mutants, or the blip created mutants. That being said, I don't know what else you do since it's so late into the MCU. Um, well, I say that the way that, now that I'm thinking about it, the way that I could see them doing it is we're not going to be getting any X-Men movies prior to Secret Wars, with the exception of Deadpool 3, which is a continuation of the Fox stuff. It's not a reboot of any of that. Um, so I could see them also through Secret Wars having the universe like be altered enough to where mutants have always existed, instead of, okay, well now they just started to exist. They could have it to where the universe has been changed enough to where like they have always existed, and in that way keep a lot of what had already been there with the MCU's history, just with mutants a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would make the most sense if you're wanting to keep it natural. In essence, as I guess what it truly has been in like the comics and shows, is yeah, the natural evolution has led to this. Or we could also just do like a straight multiverse jump, kind of like just go into a separate multi or universe, and then like maybe bring in like some of those characters back and introduce the world to mutant kind, and then like they just all start popping up or something.
Yeah, that's true. They could do something like that as well.
But that's I don't even know if X-Men's on their radar at the moment because they're probably just trying to get through Secret Wars, and then that's probably when they bring in everybody,
Yeah.
set everything up after that.
I don't know. It's just so awkward continuing on the MCU now that they've got all these characters and franchises they didn't have access to at the start. Um, because as much as I love the MCU, a lot of it early on was making the best of kind of these B-list characters that they have, because they didn't have access to Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, a lot of these A-list characters. And so it's weird to be getting into phase 4, 5, 6 and being like, okay, now we have to introduce, now's when we introduce um, these heavy hitters so late into the thing. Um, that's almost why I think they should reboot. Is it's less awkward to have a complete restart, and just start with a lot of those things in the first place, then be like, okay, we're 15 years into this thing at this point. Now, here's a lot of these really big, important Marvel Comics characters that are finally being introduced into all of this. After we've gotten rid of some of our biggest characters like Iron Man, like Captain America, um, and now we're finally introducing these um, big franchises.
What if, hear me out, Marvel makes Fantastic Four and X-Men movies, but they don't tie into the MCU at all. Just completely separate uh, continuities.
I don't think that
Kind of like how they have been, in a sense.
that's likely. I think that they're more likely to tie it in. That's what I want, especially from X-Men though, is X-Men being its own thing. Because even in the comics, it's always felt kind of weird that X-Men exist in the Marvel universe, because it's this world where superheroes exist and are celebrated and are beloved, except for mutants, which is this huge section of the Marvel universe that for some reason is totally feared and despised by the public. Like, it's never really felt like, and I've had this problem with the comics for a long time, is it just never felt like it fit in the same universe. Because on the one hand, you've got Captain America and the Fantastic Four and all these superpowered characters that are celebrated by the public. But then on the other end of things, you've got the mutants, which are hated by the. It just makes more sense if it's its own universe that's not part of the Marvel universe, at least in my mind. So to
Yeah.
me, at least as far as X-Men goes, that's kind of what I want. And since they are doing the multiverse thing, you can still cross that over. You can still have the Avengers meet the X-Men, just do it through multiversal means.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with now that they have the rights to Fantastic Four and X-Men, see how they incorporate them or what they do. Because I definitely think Marvel's gonna have to step up their quality back to what it was and focus. I think they should really just focus back on the movies and not worry about the shows as much. Because now you're kind of losing the hype around a Marvel movie getting released, or some new piece of MCU content.
Or just do what they did back in 2015 when you had the Netflix shows, where at least at that point in time, those were considered completely canon to the MCU, but they
Were
weren't. Do what?
were they? I don't think they ever were. They, I don't. I'm thinking they never were.
No, they were originally meant to be canon. Um, and then there was a lot of drama between the TV side of Marvel and the movie side, which is why eventually you got to the point where stuff like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Netflix shows, none of that stuff was considered canon anymore. Um,
Okay.
but, like, at that time, you didn't have people like, why? You didn't have people saying that it was too much to keep up with the movies and the Netflix shows or the movies and Agents of Shield, because there was enough stuff spreading it out. You weren't getting something new all the time. And I think that's the problem is, like, last year you had 3 movies and what was it, 3 shows all in the same year. Um, was it 2021 or 2 where we had like 4 movies and 4 shows all in the same year?
I want to say 22. But
Because
it could also been 21 because obviously 3 years, what, 7 movies on like 5 or 6 shows. That's a lot of content being put out.
yeah, because there was one year where just within the 1 year you had on the movies Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Eternals, and No Way Home. And then on the TV side, you had WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, Loki season 1, Hawkeye, and What If. That's 9 MCU things all in the same year. That is a lot. And even last year, where it's like 3 movies and 3 shows or whatever, like that's still a lot in 1 year. I think that if they just tone it back and have maybe like have less stuff and do 1 or 2 shows a year and then really focus on the movies, I think that could lessen it up for people because since since Endgame, there's been a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time. And I think that has burnt people out on it, especially since so much of it is either A, not very good, or B, not important to the overall storyline that they're building up.
Yeah,
Um,
that Marvel fatigue.
yeah.
Because arguably that's kind of what happened with Star Wars for the longest time was the we'd have 10, 15 years between trilogies, and then we would get 3 movies in 5 or 6 years, and then here recently we kind of doubled down on the shows or whatnot, and it's now gotten to the point where people are fatigued with Star Wars, and it should just take a break. I think maybe 2 or 3 movies in the span of 6 years with like a show, I think would be good, and then you go on like a 5, 6 year break,
Yeah.
which then you get rid of the fatigue, you get enough people time to settle down, enjoy the content that you already put out, and then as you get into year 5 or year 6, the hype starts building back up for, all right, we've enjoyed this content, now let's get some more content, and then that's when you start dropping a couple more movies or shows.
You
But it
got
has to be 2 or 3 movies, like a trilogy, and then maybe like a show or two, and then you wait another few years.
you've got to make people want it though. That's the thing is when you're doing 3 movies and 4 shows a year or however much they're doing, like especially when it's not all very good quality, no one's wanting this stuff. No one's like, I can't wait for. I mean, Echo just dropped like 2 nights ago, and I have not been hearing people talk about it. And it's like when you're dropping so much all at once, there's no incentive to want any more of it because there's just so much coming at you, especially when it's not very good. I mean, what if ended its second season like a week before Echo dropped? If even?
Well, yeah, because they dropped that series. They dropped an episode a day for like 9 days during Christmas holiday season.
Yeah.
That's why I haven't watched it yet, because they went and dropped it all at Christmas when everybody's visiting family or whatnot.
And the daily thing makes sense with that a little bit more because at least they're all standalone episodes. It's not like you're trying to follow one story over the course of time. Um, and didn't they drop all of Echo at once? Like, I think they dropped
Yes,
the whole
I
season.
believe they dropped. Well, it was only like I think it's only like 5 episodes
Yeah.
is the season, so that one is a little more doable in a sense.
Yeah. Um, here's here's a question. If the stuff that they've been putting out was higher quality, l- let's say that they've put out the same amount of stuff in the course of the past 2, 3 years. Like they haven't changed the quantity of what they've put out, but the quality of it is much higher. Do you think people would be talking about Marvel fatigue the way that they are?
The potentially, I think it would be in a different light because we talk about Marvel fatigue in the sense of, oh, we're getting this content, but it's not good content. I feel like if they were to up their quality and still put out the same amount of stuff, it'll be more of just general quantity fatigue based on quantity. Because obviously, if you're trying to, you're releasing X number of movies and X number of shows within a year, people having to find time to watch it, and then also uh, trying to figure out where everything fits in the timeline and if it all fits together. I think at that point it'd be a little more enjoyable to sit down and watch everything throughout the year
Yeah.
versus what we're getting now where She-Hulk was obviously an abomination because of CGI and the writing. It's some of the acting in that where it's if they were to actually focus on one project at a time and give it the attention it needs, She-Hulk probably would have been a half decent show.
And I also think part of the problem is a lot of this stuff nowadays gets made by obligation. Like they decide that they're doing certain projects, they announce these projects, and then they're like, okay, well, these things have to be made, and we'll just get people to make them whether they want to make these specific things or not. And they kind of plan out what these things are going to be about before they even get people involved writing or directing it. I think that if they go back to kind of the way things were done in like phase one, or just, how movies are generally made to begin with, by getting people who come in with these pitches and like get people who really want to make this stuff. Um, like James Gunn with his Guardians movies, and this isn't the best example because this has like a ton of behind the scenes drama going on, but the only reason Blade is even getting a movie is because that main actor went to Marvel and was like, I really want to do a Blade movie. Um, I think that if you get projects that people behind the scenes want to make instead of getting people to make the projects that you want them to make, I think that could help a lot too. Like get stuff that people are passionate about. Get people in there who are passionate about the specific projects instead of, well, this guy is hired on to make this movie that we basically already had every decision made for beforehand. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like there's a time and a place for doing obligation movies. But then obviously, yes, like you said, definitely need to go back to pitching movies to studios, especially where doesn't necessarily fit in the timeline. It's just more like a passion project.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's well received, then they can go back in within the next few movies from your main timeline and kind of tie that solo movie into it.
Yeah.
If you don't already have that, at least don't already have that up front of how you want to tie it in.
Yeah, like you
Because
could.
that's what I'm. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say they could even just like, okay, here's the big story that we're building. Here are a few little things that we want you to integrate into your story. It doesn't have to completely rewrite the story, but here are some things to put in that can tie it into that. So that way there is a continuity, is a overarching story, but you still have overall a standalone passion project type thing. Um,
That's also the issue is you run into uh obviously the funders and all this other stuff where they want certain things to happen in the film, but then when it's all said and done, they're not happy about what's going on, and so they have like the writing team and the director redo the entire movie to get what they want. So that's kind of like why said retroactively bring them in, bring the solo project in versus having it right up front, is because sometimes the producers or whatnot want certain thing to happen, and that's brings the movie down because obviously it probably doesn't work within that story, but that's what they want versus true passion project where the director and writers can set up how they want it. Maybe leave a few things in there to help tie them in, but tie them in retroactively within the next movie or two, I think is a better way of doing it, or at
yeah,
least
that's
passion projects
true.
wise.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm trying to think. I had something else a minute ago, but I can't remember what it was. Um, if they were to reboot and start over, do you think that they should? How long between the end of the current MCU and the start of the new one, whatever the new one were to look like, how much time do you think they should take in between?
I definitely think they should do probably at least like 5 6 years, because obviously like I said earlier, you can quote unquote marinate on what we have, set up the expectation, and then by the end of that time period, you can start, uh, work on your marketing, work on building the hype for this new rebooted universe, and then that'll hopefully drive numbers back to the MCU. Because that was one of the things going back to like the Star Wars analogy, the time frame between the end of the prequels and the Force Awakens. There was so much hype built up between that they saw record breaking numbers at the box office and streamings for that movie. So I think definitely think waiting a time period between finishing out what we have and rebooting it will definitely do them some good.
And then even with like Star Wars on the fatigue thing, because I didn't think of this earlier when we were talking about it. You look at 2015 versus 2019 when Rise of Skywalker came out, and just how much stuff came out in that time frame, and you can immediately see the difference in audience reception in just how much money Rise of Skywalker made compared to Force Awakens. Um, and then add on to that, like the years since then, where we've gotten so many shows and stuff. Like, there has been such an oversaturation with that and an over fatigue thing with that. Same thing with Marvel. Like, in 2019, when all we had was the movies, Endgame was the biggest thing ever. Like, it and Infinity War made insane amounts of money. I don't think that would like, even if those two movies were as good as they were, I don't think that that would happen today because there's just so much and people are so tired of it. I
Well, also, Infinity Ward Endgame worked because they played the long game and setting up Thanos as like the big bad back at the end of Phase One, and then continuing working that storyline throughout all the movies before getting into obviously bringing in Thanos as the villain for those movies. So you're accumulating all this hype across 12-ish years, I believe is what the time frame is for all those movies. And then you drop the big encounter, the big team up, and all that stuff. Because that's what, up until that point, MCU fairly had. You had your Avengers, you had your Guardians, you had your different teams. And then that's what bringing in Thanos as a big bad. They all had to team up with Infinity War, Avengers losing. And then that pushed viewers to go watch Endgame to get them to see how the world reacted to losing and then how they were going to fight back and, all that stuff, which that added to the hype. I feel like if they were trying to do something like that now with the post Infinity Saga slate that we have, it definitely would not have worked,
I
or
mean,
definitely will not work if they do try that.
Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, they've been pushed back since then, but originally they were supposed to come out in 2025 and 2026 respectively. Th- that's only 4 to 5 years from the start of the multiverse saga all the way to the end of it. That is way too much in too short of a time to truly build up the same amount of hype that there was to Infinity War and Endgame. Like you said, it was the 10, 11, 12 years of buildup, however much time it was, between all of that, that made those two movies feel like such a big deal compared to 4 to 5 years of what we were originally going to get. Like, you don't have nearly enough time to build up that same level of hype, especially when you're exhausting people with just an overabundance of these movies and these shows, especially when so many of them are either A, not very good, or B, don't tie into this stuff enough to make you feel excited for it.
I think they should do kind of like what Star Wars has done ever since Force Awakens was released, is you either have a movie or a show a year. Granted, the Star Wars fatigue is due to the movies not being of good quality or have, decent writing and acting and whatnot. But if you were to double down and actually focus on quality, a movie or TV show a year would be fine.
Yeah.
And it would actually make sense to where if they were to do that up until the release of Secret Wars, Kang Dynasty, and whatnot, that would work. Building that hype back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, give us less stuff with higher quality and make people feel excited for it. I think part of the problem too is people just aren't overly excited for Kang and the multiverse stuff. Like, I still haven't seen Ant Man 3, but like the big thing I've heard about that movie is how Kang is not an interesting villain, how he's kind of lame throughout most of that movie. And you that's your setup for your big overarching villain. And if people aren't liking him, and on top of that, people aren't liking the majority of what you're putting out, and you're just dumping too much stuff on people at once, like, you're not going to have a um you're not going to have a successful event movie like you had with Thanos in the Infinity Saga.
Because I hate that the Kang character wasn't well written in Quantumania. Because Jonathan Majors is a good actor when it comes to his characters in Loki. He remains in Victor Timely. I heard it's like the acting was good in Quantumania. The issue was just the writing because they didn't make him an, I guess not necessarily an interesting character, but didn't give him the big bad status like the comic books or other other media has portrayed him as.
I mean,
Because he got quickly defeated by Ant-Man in the movie.
that's what I was about to bring up. Like, he's your big bad of your entire series, and you have him get beaten, from what I understand, in a fist fight by Ant-Man. Like, no one's going to be excited for that villain if that's your introduction to him. Like, no one's going to like that character if in his first movie he's set up as this big overarching villain, but he gets beaten in a fist fight by Ant-Man.
Because like the one piece of media I'm thinking of with King the Conqueror is the Avengers Earth Mightiest Heroes show
Yes.
way back in the day. Their introduction of Kang, is him trying to come kill Captain America, and the first meeting with the Avengers, he completely wipes the floor with them. Like that's what makes him so much cooler and a more impressive villain in that show is because he just comes in and absolutely just wrecks the Avengers.
He
Whereas MCU, you get defeated by one of the lesser known slash weaker, Avengers.
Yeah, we're supposed to believe that this guy's going to be a threat to Thor or Doctor Strange or Captain Marvel or Scarlet Witch or any of these really powerful characters when the first time we saw him was him getting beat up by Ant-Man. Like, that's not a good look for your. It's like if our introduction to Thanos was him losing a fight to Black Widow 5 movies before Infinity War. Like, that's not a good look for your big Avengers level threat villain. Because then it just takes the stakes out of this character that's supposed to be this big universal threat if they can just get easily beat by one of your lesser powerful characters.
I mean, obviously too with the post credit scene, I believe for Quantumania sets up the a lot of the variants of Kang the Conqueror. So I mean, we very well could still have Kang as a villain, albeit like a stronger, better Kang. But as for right now, the one King the Conqueror we know of got defeated by, uh, obviously
Ant-Man.
got defeated by by Ant Man, and that doesn't look well.
Yeah. Yeah, that just makes him look pathetic to your audience, and that's not a good look for your big main villain. But I'm actually gonna have to go here in a minute. I've got some things I need to take care of. So, do you have any final thoughts for this before we wrap up?
Uh, no, I think I about said everything I wanted to say.
Yeah, me too. This has kind of got me thinking. Like this, I don't know when I'm gonna have the time to do this, but it might be cool. It's kind of got me thinking about like expanding on my pitch. So I might come back and do like a solo video on this here in the not too distant future, just kind of fleshing out a whole phase one, because I always enjoy doing these like fan pitch type stuff. Um, but yeah, it's on the flip side of that, it is really sad to see what's going on with the MCU right now and how this thing that we started this podcast with, because our first episode was us talking about Infinity War and just the hype around that after that movie came out. And now we're sitting here like, yeah, we're kind of just exhausted with this whole thing and kind of want it to just end and start over.
Is that really what our podcast has come to?
It's what the MCU is. That's kind of what our last episode was too. We weren't saying that Star Wars needed to start over, but we were like, we're kind of disappointed with where Star Wars is at right now too.
We just become a hate podcast. That's all it is.
You no.
We're gonna start roasting everybody. No.
um,
Have we done a DC hate podcast yet?
no, and this year, or not this year, 2023 really kind of deserved it, honestly, with everything that they put out.
So is that going to be our topic for the next podcast we do? Roasting the DC movies?
That can be because 4 movies in
'Cause
1 year.
we've done Star Wars and Marvel. Time to finish out the big three
Yeah,
and do DC.
that's true. We haven't even really talked about the slate for the DCU, so that could be an interesting topic to talk about next time too. Um, you know,
Do a what if?
like a year after James Gunn announced everything that's going to be coming out. But
Has been a year since he announced the reboot?
it's been almost a year.
Or-
I think it was like February of last year or something like that when he announced all the movies that were coming out.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, yeah, that probably would be a good topic for next time. So we'll try and do that sooner rather than later now that we're into the new year and um, don't have holidays to deal with and everything. Try to do that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed. And again, hopefully we'll be back sooner rather than later with another episode of The Fortress. I've been Caleb. This has been Michael, and we'll see you guys next time.
Hi, guys.
Bye bye.